The Privacy and Security Innovators Circle recently introduced their introductory book called Privacy API, which stands for Privacy Applied, Proactive, and Innovative. Hello, I'm PD Prasad, co-founder at LightBeam.ai, and with me, I've got a very special guest, Jutta Williams, the editor of this book and an accomplished industry veteran who led privacy programs at Google, Facebook, Twitter, amongst others. Jutta also happened to pen an article in the book on architecting a new privacy program. Jutta, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here on this introductory podcast to go along with this incredible book.
Perfect. Jutta, maybe we can get started with the motivation you and others had behind coming together and co-creating this introductory book.
Yeah, I was so excited to be invited to edit this book and to be a contributor. I think that, privacy has been a bit of a lonely profession for a really long time. It's fairly subjective. Each company builds its own program, and so approaches vary. So it can feel very isolating. And then even within a company, privacy folks are often creating controls and sometimes creating what might seem like barriers to other people's success. So it can be isolating inside of a company as well. So having the opportunity to kind of share approaches and wisdom that may or may not apply at your business, but at least helps spawn some ideas for how you might approach data protection generally, I think was it was an opportune time. I think that these programs are growing in popularity. Maybe popularity is the wrong word, but in number. And I think that, there's becoming more and more clash between existing functions like security or legal or compliance, and just kind of understanding how privacy, security, and these other functions fit together in well-oiled machines at some of these programs, I think can just help inform others.
Now, that tees up very well for my next question, which is in the book, you have written an article on how to go about architecting a new privacy program. Could you tell us a little bit more about that more, please? Yeah.
So, part of great product design. So I've been a product manager, an engineer. I've been a compliance officer. I've sit in a couple of different functions. And I feel like the engineering disciplines really apply to building great programs and implementing great sticky projects. And I think that when you can start with design and architecture, it helps teams and groups go faster. It helps us make fewer mistakes, less costly mistakes, as we have to kind of pivot and innovate on different approaches to protecting data. So this article was really crafted for the new learner, the person who's kind of been given this job as an additional duty as assigned, which happens to a lot of people, or maybe who are people who are stepping into new roles where there isn't a lot of established process to depend on, or maybe it's a new engineering discipline. And I don't think that any of the recommendations here apply solely to kind of an administrative level privacy program versus a very technical privacy program. I think that these approaches are fairly applicable, but also defensible. There's often an emphasis on compliance of privacy programs, but really compliance is almost impossible because there's no checklist. It's a very subjective determination based on your perceived and documented risk position for how you would approach protecting data for your company. So these are less technical in nature for this particular article, although I hope to write more on more technical topics, and a little bit more of a how to get started successfully building your support, finding places where you can contribute very early, and kind of how do you create a really sticky kind of implementation strategy, sticky being, a sustainable change within an organization for very large or very small changes that you're trying to implement. So my hope is that providing a little bit of framework and kind of repeatable process for how you establish a change will help a lot of privacy pros. And maybe this is all things people already know, but this was kind of how I approached privacy in the healthcare sector that I brought to big tech, and that I share with a lot of my friends and customers in an independent consulting role.
Absolutely, indeed. And a number of things that we have, in a number of cases that we have observed, there are a number of people who have started their journey on privacy fairly recently. Like there are a number of people who have just been in this privacy space for like a year or so. And sometimes even lesser, actually. What advice would you give to a professional who has just started their journey on privacy?
Well, first of all, it doesn't matter what sector or part of the business you come from. Privacy is kind of an amalgamation or a melting pot of a lot of different roles. So what that means is that you have expertise coming from someplace, whether that's legal or engineering or data science or maybe just operations from a customer service point of view. All of those functions have a contributing role to a privacy program. So where you're expert in, we need it. Where you're going, you're going to have to learn a few new things. Every person who comes to this role has to learn a few new things. So hopefully this book and kind of the wisdom shared by people who came from a very broad spectrum of backgrounds are able to give a little bit of wisdom and advice on how to kind of think through these problems from their point of view so that you can have a really great conversation with other parts of the business that maybe you don't have as much knowledge about. It's kind of where this API idea started for me, was as a translator role. You're going to have to learn another language or maybe three in order to have really meaningful conversations about privacy across the org. So my journey started as an engineer, moved into compliance, came out of a very administratively compliant industry in healthcare, back to engineering, into product management, back to engineering again. And I think that just understanding legal terminology and regulatory expectation, understanding how technology works, understanding some depth of how technology controls might be applied from a security and privacy sense. All of these are learnings, and we're all going to make mistakes. These mistakes are part of iteration and growth and finding the right approach for your business. So first of all, you can laugh or you can cry when these mistakes happen. I choose to laugh. A lot of the privacy pros who write in this book are also kind of at that point in their career where we can cry in private and laugh a little bit more publicly and figure out how to approach the problems iteratively, but also patience, understanding that there's a lot to learn and that there are allies inside your company who all want the same outcome, which is to protect people and their data. So being patient with yourself, forgiving yourself when things don't quite go the way that you hope, and then understanding where to go ask for more questions and finding a peer group where you can ask those questions and kind of receive a little bit of wisdom, which is what I hope for from these authors.
Yeah, and in your article, you have talked about the concept of having an ally or finding an ally, finding a peer group who can actually help you out. As a product manager, I got to tell you that resonates really well with me because often product managers are also doing the same thing, which is translating one type of requirement, which is from customers, and then translating that into an engineering requirement. And it seems the way you have framed your article and in general, your approach to privacy that you're asking people to take is, hey, think about your allies, think about people who could be helping you. Not everything is a fight or doesn't have to be a battle all the time in some sense, which is wonderful and really resonates with me. If I were to kind of ask you about, since you are one of the unique individuals who have run privacy programs at really large organizations and also at really small organizations in terms of like headcount, if you had one wish for ensuring privacy practices are effectively being applied, what would that one wish be?
Such a good question. My one wish would be that people can take education and turn it into applied training or applied practice. A lot of the education that's out there about privacy is about what the laws say, what the regulations say, what people's expectations are, how citizen rights are afforded in technology. But sometimes it's really hard to translate those kind of more abstract regulatory concepts into tactical things that an engineer or an operations person in customer service or in healthcare in the records management department would need to do in their everyday lives. It's really hard to turn that into practical training. And then there is a big difference between education, training, and awareness. And all three are expected from a regulatory perspective. But turning education into training and then helping people stay aware so that they're making those really smart choices every day in their everyday work, it's so transformative for an organization. I can tell you, healthcare really made this leap. Every person I worked with in healthcare understood that their job was an extension of the doctor-patient confidential promise. And so they really had internalized how their work, whether they were a nurse or someone cleaning a room, we're an extension of that promise between a physician and a patient. And when people make that transition into applying these concepts through practical application in their everyday decision making, oh my gosh, it would transform tech. I can promise you that much. But kind of understanding how that regulatory work really translates into everyday tactics, that's the hard part. And frankly, where there's a lot more education and just information sharing needed.
I think there's a very interesting point. It just resonated with me a lot because, often we hear of healthcare as one of those sectors that are always kind of slow moving and, it's like, very vetted in the past and so on. But what you're actually highlighting is healthcare is actually a leader when it comes to ensuring doctor-patient privacy. And it's not just the doctors, it's about every other individual and support staff there that actually has imbibed that doctor-patient privacy. And if we, the so-called fast-moving verticals and sectors, if we could just learn from that, that would go a long way. Such an insightful thought right over there. Now, a little bit of the fun part. Now, it looks like with this book, you've also launched a group called Privacy and Security Innovators Circle, PSI or PSI, I suppose is how it is pronounced.
Yeah.
What is the motivation around launching that group? What's the purpose of that group?
Oh man, it's so difficult to find a community that's kind of been through the ringer, who's learned some lessons, can share some insight. But every time I talk to a privacy practitioner or a security practitioner, whether they're really early in their journey or, are veterans like yourself, PD, I learned something really interesting. Like every approach is slightly different. And I go to conferences and I meet people and I talk with them about, their work and I ask them questions. Everybody's approach is valid. There's a bit of validity. And so there's not really an expert or a leader. There's just this community. And that's why circle is so important in the naming convention here, is that this is like sitting around sharing war stories and learnings and sharing the opportunity to kind of take away some of that information, maybe apply it in your business. So Psi I like because, it's a little psychic, which is what our business expects us to be and our regulators expect us to be. Pounds per square inch, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of tension. The circle, it's just a really fun name, but its intention is really just to bring like-minded people together or maybe unlike-minded people together so that we can share some questions, share some approaches, and just kind of have a community of peers. Because again, as I said in the very beginning, it's kind of isolating. It's very lonely in a privacy world because you're kind of separate from tech, you're kind of separate from legal, you're kind of separate from the people who are also in this field because you're just part of a small community within a company, but part of a larger external community where we're all in competition, co-opetition with each other. So it's just kind of hopefully, it's intended to be a place where you can share a funny story sometimes, maybe help everybody laugh instead of cry, but also just kind of share an approach to solving a problem. My favorite way of describing some of these risk-based frameworks is to call is to refer to our obligations as reasonable and appropriate based on our size and complexity. And boy, isn't there a lot of gray area in all of that. Right? So understanding how to navigate that gray area takes a little bit of experimentation and experience. And so if you're new to privacy, especially, come to a place where there's a couple of veterans with a little more gray hair, not necessarily from age, but certainly from stress, who can kind of share a perspective. That's the goal of the group.
Wonderful. Looks like we all can benefit by joining and contributing, whether we are like-minded or unlike-minded, as you very rightly put. It doesn't matter. It's a circle. And one of the things that I've started noticing is as privacy is becoming more and more popular as a practice, there are a number of companies where there's just one person doing privacy, just one individual doing privacy. And it probably is natural to feel lonely at some point in time because you're dealing with so many functions and so on and so forth. So that's where hopefully our PSI or PSI Circle group can become handy, and we can all talk to each other and debate, discuss, and so on and so forth. Well, Jutta, this was lovely. Thank you for editing and leading this book and launching the PSI Circle. We look forward to hearing from you again, obviously, and hope to see future editions of the Privacy API book.
Yeah, thank you so much. And PD, I just have to compliment you on kind of getting us all started along this track and then helping us kind of publish this free of charge through sponsorship through LightBeam. And it's just been a really great opportunity to kind of have some fun, share some ideas, and start conversations. Thanks again, and thanks for hosting this podcast.
No problem at all. Wonderful. Thank you so much, folks, and look forward to, keep looking forward to another series from this podcast in just a short while. Thank you.